Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show and our latest episode of SF at School. I'm Shaun, obviously, and on today's show, I'm talking to two very special guests from the furry literature community, that is Robert Lyle and Kyell Gold. Robert Lyle, aka Resolute, is an author of short stories and novellas and serves as the public relations officer of the Furry Writers Guild. And Kyell Gold is the Ursa Major Award-winning author of short stories and novels with settings including his contemporary Forester universe and the Renaissance era Argaea? Is that correct?
Argaea.
Okay, furry world. Welcome to you both to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if folks would like, just as a reminder, you can go to skiffyvanny.com/listener suggestions if you'd like to throw out comments and questions about our shows, and then make sure you come to our live format. This is what's happening right now, which is the live format every Friday at 7 p.m. at Twitch at Alphabet Streams. And then we have a Patreon and stuff, but I'll mention that all at the end. And so what I want to do is dive right into our subject. And so I'm going to start with my silly questions, and I'll start with the what might be the easiest one, which is, What is a furry and what is furry literature?
Well, I can start if you don't mind, Kyell. The easiest definition that I have heard for what is furry is that it is and easiest and shortest definition is a creative celebration of the anthropomorphic arts. And so, the easiest examples to point to would be a number of Disney films. We've got, Robin Hood, Lion King, Zootopia that came out, goodness, that's almost a decade ago. Basically, you have anthropomorphic features with, be it animals, be it fantasy creatures, or things even more exotic than that. And furry is it's a broad umbrella of this is, people who are interested in some form or another. And it takes many different forms. I believe there was a study that 95% of furries are creatives of some variety.
Whoa.
So whether it be art, writing, as Kyell and I do, and it can be music, it can be photography, it can be making suits, a whole range of things.
My answer to that is, at least in the fun sense, is with a question, which is, Son, have you ever thought about what animal you would be if you were an animal?
Yeah, I have. It's some sort of reptilian.
Do you want to share? You don't have to.
No, it'd be a reptilian of some description. Absolutely.
All right. Furries are people who have thought a lot about that question and continue to think about that question a great deal in their everyday lives and pursuits. I like to ask it that way because many people kind of have that affinity with an animal, but we are a group that takes it that extra step to think, oh, but if I was that animal, what would I do? And how would I live? And what would the world be like? And what would my stories be like? And maybe I want someone to draw a picture of me as that animal, or maybe I want to commission a costume of that animal so I can actually be that animal. And I think that's the kind of quick, fun way to say what is a furry.
You're making me think of when you're like a kid, right? And you do the face painting and everyone's like, oh, make me a tiger or something like that. Kids do that all the time.
Exactly.
That's oddly
sure.
very natural to a kid. For me, it was trying to mash as many different video game and movie franchises in the same thing. I think one year I went as a ninja, Ryu from Street Fighter, and a Jedi in the same thing. Nobody else knew what I was doing, but
But you did, and you were having fun, right?
I was having a lot of fun. Yeah, it was great.
That's what matters.
Yeah. All right, so the next question, which I think will be a little bit more sillier than a what question, which is, where are furries?
Everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, maybe primarily online, but that's not as true as it used to be, because there is I think this might literally be true now. There's a furry convention somewhere in the world every weekend of the year.
Oh my gosh.
Pretty close to it, yes.
Yeah, if it's not literally true, it's only like a couple off. And Memorial Day weekend, one of the chat groups I was in, we had 3 of us in at different conventions the same weekend. There was a UK convention, there was a local convention here, and there was a not camping con, there was a con up in Portland also. And they were all the same weekend. So there's so many conventions now that you can find furries easily in a town near you.
Yeah, very likely. Yeah, I would imagine so. Okay, great. Okay, so the next one will be, why are furries?
Yeah,
Robert,
I would
Do you want to
say,
start that one?
sure. I would say again, it's the creative aspect of it. It's the imagination. Everyone kind of brings their own thing. Some people want to be that animal or creature or persona that they've created, fursona as it's called. Some people don't have a character themselves, but they're like, I want to create this world of, what would happen if werewolves, had to coexist with dragons and what have you. And they want to explore that and explore it beyond just the skin deep, fur deep, however you want to put it. But like, what is it like to live with those instincts? What is it like to have a society where smell and hearing are so much more potent than sight? That sort of thing. And some people are just into it to enjoy the creations of others, which is perfectly fine. And everyone brings their own kind of perspective and story to it. It's not like a fandom convention for like a specific show or property or media. It's not even like just a general science fiction convention. It's there are people who are going to be like, oh yeah, I want to be the one of the characters from Disney's Robin Hood. But then there are plenty of people who are like, I've never seen that, but I saw this thing online and I'm part of this group and I want to explore that. There are artists. Everyone brings something unique to it, really. And it makes the community a very rich place.
I think the why is very similar to the answer if you were to ask why science fiction and fantasy, which is this world is kind of boring, and we like to imagine a better world. In a more personal sense, like why furry specifically as our escape. Everybody has different likes and preferences, but one of the things that has really struck me about the furry community is how much it has its roots in personal identity.
Mm.
So when you pick an animal, for example, or fursona, you're picking an animal based partly on the biological traits of the animal. Like if you're very big, you might say, oh, I identify with bears or tigers. If you're on the shorter side, like me, you would identify with maybe foxes or um, but
Or the
there's
other way
also a lot
around.
of or the other way around. It's also sometimes aspirational identity. I have a friend who was about my size but was really into working out, and his persona was a tiger because he wanted to be really big and that's how he imagined himself. But there's also a lot of cultural associations that we have with animals. And so we have this idea of, if I say tiger, we have a way of calling people those things. That he's a real tiger, or that person's a wolf, and what wolf is has changed a whole lot as we had in the I think late 80s and early 90s. We had Jim Brandenburg's White Wolf specials and learned more about what wolves were, and then people were like, oh, they're family and pack and strength and all that. So we have this kind of wheel of cultural personalities, and animals are more colorful and varied than we are. And so you kind of go around and you're like, oh, that kind of fits with me because I have this personality trait. And also I like red fur, so I want to be a fox. I want to be kind of flashy, um and so that way to express not only what you feel is your identity, but also maybe an aspirational identity or how you want other people to see you is a really important part of the community. And it's fun that when you meet someone, one of the first things that you ask is, "Oh, what are you?" And then you learn something about them right away.
Yep. And it doesn't have to be, as we would say, real world animals. Like, for example, my primary sona, as it were, is a griffin. So mythological creatures. I mean, dragons are one of the most popular species, I believe. I think foxes just overtook wolves as the most popular.
Oh,
really?
Yes.
We've been number 2 for so long.
But like dragons are like 3 or 4 on that ranking. So it's there's a lot of mythology around dragons, and a lot of people are like, they embrace, maybe they embrace the power of it, or maybe they just like the aesthetic, whatever it may be.
And there's also, just a brief note, there's also species that the furry community has created in our creative works. Sackheads are the first ones that come to mind. They're centaur-like.
They're cat-tars.
They are cats. Okay, I was going to say cats, and then I was like, I'm not 100% sure, and I don't want to say that on a public forum.
My second character is one, so
okay, there you go. Thank you.
Basically, it's like, you have the centaur, which is, the human top half, and then the horse. Chat is basically cat, that same body style, but cat. Like we're talking like large cat, like tigers or snow leopards, that sort of thing.
Interesting.
So that, like Kyell said, that's one of the original kind of fandom creations of people looked at things and went, okay, I like these things, I like those things. What if we made something new?
So it's interesting you brought up that, and both of you have been talking about this kind of directly applied to yourselves, but the very personal aspect of people's relationship to their persona, or even just to the community in general. And you're making me think a lot about a few years ago when there were all this talk about Sonic Fox, who is a video game player who is also goes as this blue fox, and for like the longest time just kind of wore like little ears and like would have occasionally the tail, and then just went full bore into it and was just the full, would bring the head out and all of these things. And it was so interesting because here is this community where you would think like video game community, based on how the online universe works, you would just think like this is not something where someone would find a space for, and yet here is this person very much out there, exceptional at these fighting games, and also very visibly a furry in public. And I don't know how much you're aware of that, but it made me kind of really think about his interviews where their interviews where they talked a lot about, their relationship to this identity that they had.
Yeah, I loved hearing, love hearing about Sonic Fox. I haven't heard about them in a while, but that's just me living under a rock sometimes. No, that's the sort of thing. And unfortunately, like you kind of said, the gaming community, the online community, furries have kind of been at the bottom of the punching bag, as it were.
The geek social hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think a lot of that was, I don't know how much we want to get into the history of that, but a lot of that was driven by, image boards, 4chan, something awful. I don't want to name drop places like that and say, oh, these places are to blame too much. But like there were elements of that drove it, and a lot of it is rooted in kind of more impactful phobias. Because the furry community is also very LGBTQ plus positive, very open, like sex positive in a lot of cases. And there is a lot of kind of visibility of that and pushback against that. And it's been flaring up again recently with the talk about, not to get political, but the talk about the litter boxes in schools, which,
God.
It's a shame that there's, kids these days don't carry around like a little photographic device that could take pictures of that and prove it exists, because I haven't seen any of that, but
yeah, I wanted to say quickly about Sonic Fox, that not only is he furry, he's also openly queer, and
yes.
they are openly queer as well, which would, as you noted, not necessarily super popular in the gaming community, but the fact that they were the best in the world at these games and would routinely go to tournaments and beat all the other gamers gave them a sort of currency to be more open and be more themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fantastic, because that gives more space for other people who maybe aren't the best in the world but still want to express those identities in that way, to move into that space, or to be more themselves in that space. And the whole idea is being yourself, I think.
Yes.
Agree.
Or the self that you want to be.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we kind of went down this path, because there's sort of like two directions I want to go from here. I want to go the happier direction first, if I could. Because
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think is kind of coming out a little bit is, I'm not a member of the community, but my experiences with members of that community, and seeing some individuals who I rather like, talking about things happening in the community. In general, the furry community, as I understand it, is remarkably generous with its time and really open and welcoming to people. Even I think like the image that sticks in my head is, years ago there was an image of a furry convention happening at a hotel somewhere in Canada, and there were a bunch of refugees there from I can't remember where, somewhere in the Middle East. I cannot remember exactly where. And people would just think that this would be such a clash, right? Cultures clashing, and there's just pictures of all these people hanging out with the kids and like being very welcoming and open, and lots of smiles. And not being a member of the community, I can only speak from what I see. And so I kind of want to get your perspectives on the sort of feeling of being part of that community.
I do think that that openness and welcoming is really important. There's a thing that we have said for a while, because there have been over the years attempts for people to say, oh, you're not being a furry in the right way, and you have to do this in order to be a furry. And those tend to get shouted down, and people say, look, however you want to be part of this community, if you want to be part of it, that's the thing.
Yes.
There was an article, I think, in Rolling Stone, although I may be wrong about that, talking about parents coming to furry conventions with their queer children, and the queer children finding a safe space at furry conventions that they couldn't find anywhere else.
Yes.
And one of the big changes that I've seen over the last, I want to say 8 to 10 years, precedes the pandemic by a couple of years, definitely has gone up afterwards, is a lot more of that. And one of the things that will always get me really emotional at a furry convention is seeing a parent with a kid in tow, and the kid has their fursuit, they have like maybe just a head, or they have the full suit, and the kid is obviously having such a great time, and the parent is enabling that, and the kid is discovering who they are and being allowed to be who they are, and just, opening those doors and seeing people have such a good time, because mostly people do, and we make those experiences possible. And I think that's one reason the community keeps growing, is because we do say, look, come on in and have a good time.
No, absolutely. And I think, just aside from that, being generous within the community, it's also worth noting there was an article, I forget where it was, but from one of the charities. Every single convention that furries run, to my knowledge anyway, will have a charity that they sponsor, and it's almost always like an animal welfare, animal shelter charity of some sort, and they will raise thousands, tens of thousands of dollars over the course of the weekend. And I believe it was the Anthrocon in Pittsburgh, which used to be the largest for a long time, until the Chicago convention kind of leapfrogged it. Because, Pittsburgh is not the biggest city, and they kind of maxed out the downtown space. And this is one thing that gets me, is you have all these furries who are coming out. I mean, some folks, only get out to conventions like once a year. That's all they can afford. And you have people who will then donate to these causes, to, animal welfare, to animal shelters. And there have been multiple instances now where, at the closing ceremonies for the convention, they will say, okay, we've reached, 45,000. We want to get over to that 50,000 mark. And the charity representatives just kind of break down a little bit, because people will be literally sprinting to the stage and throwing money onto it to get over that goal. And it's just, and there's a lot of, intra-community help. Like I said, there are a lot of furries who, they may only be able to get to one convention a year. And a lot of those are, they have friends who will be like, okay, I can split a room with you. We can, I can bring some food. We can bring blah, 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 and help each other out. And so it is very generous, very giving community, by and large. I mean, furry isn't a monolith. It is a very, like I said, very large umbrella of a whole lot of different communities under one more or less banner. But by and large, yes.
Yeah.
I do want to jump in on the charity thing real quick, because one thing that I find really interesting is, I remember the days when there was one furry convention a year, and somewhere in there, they decided it would be a good idea to sponsor a charity, and it's just become like baked into the DNA of furry conventions.
Yes.
Like the whatever Eve, the primal mitochondria that gave rise to all life on Earth. Like, some convention made that decision, and now everyone's just like, well, we're starting a furry convention. Who's the charity we're going to donate to? Because there has to be one. It's an aspect of a furry convention.
Mm-hmm.
And I have also attended some closing ceremonies and gotten emotional watching the charity people cry on stage as they look at the number, and sometimes they've even said into the microphone, this is going to allow us to do this thing and this thing and this thing, and this is going to save like this many more animals this year, and
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know what we were going to do, and now we have all this money, and it's it's fantastic.
That is very, very beautiful to hear. There's an example in chat, by the way, I want to bring up, which is kind of wild, but also really, really sweet. Trendane in chat mentions that Violent J from the Insane Clown Posse, I guess, had a fursuit made and attended a con with his daughter in support of her, which I had no idea. That is so cool.
Hi Tren. I saw them at the Chicago convention. I didn't interact with them at all, but I did see them around, and I remember that story at the time, and that was when we were all like, "Oh, Insane Clown Posse is pretty cool." It turns out.
My understanding is that community, the Insane Clown Posse community, is very similar in its acceptance, and I suppose also has run into its own issues of having a visibility issue where not everybody necessarily respects that community, even though, as far as I'm aware, they're like nice. So,
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with them, but that's what I've heard as well. It's like, don't judge a book by its cover type of thing.
Yeah. And that is something I kind of wanted. So I said there was like a negative and like a nice one. And I wanted to start with the nice one because I want to lead with the nice things.
Is good. Good vibes.
Nice is good. But I think, Robert, you had mentioned that, that there is I think you both have mentioned this actually in different ways, that there's a sort of social hierarchy, and furries have sometimes been viewed as being very at the bottom of that hierarchy. And I don't necessarily, I mean, you're free to kind of bring up as much as you would like, but I guess to get a sense of, why do you feel that the community has sort of basically been like beat up by kind of the rest of the geek-oriented communities? What is it that makes that hierarchy even function, I guess, for this? Given what we're kind of talking about now, which, I mean, it sounds like a really nice group of really nice people. So what's the deal?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to like give you a very abbreviated personal recollection. The first thing I remember was an infamous Wired article back when Furry was mostly online, about how in online gaming spaces, mucks and muds and so on, the furry gaming space was mostly, according to the Wired article, mostly notorious for people just logging on to roleplay sex with each other. And that kind of stuck with the community. A bunch of people came onto the furry mucks at those points looking for that kind of activity. There were other articles later, the venues of which I'm not going to remember perfectly, but there were articles about, they would focus on kind of the extreme parts of the fandom and say, look, this person collects plushies and has relations with them. And there's always the sexual component, because that's the thing that you can kind of like work at people
issue,
with. Yeah. And so I think furries are more visible, more, flamboyant isn't quite the right word, but because of the costumes and the fursuits, just more bright and visible and out there. And because, as Robert had mentioned earlier, we're not fans of a specific thing. So if, Star Trek fans were the butt of jokes in mainstream media for a while, and then Star Trek became more and more and more popular, and now everybody can say, oh, yeah, Star Trek. I know Star Trek. Like, oh, your whole life is Star Trek? Well, whatever. I guess it's pretty popular. The furry community didn't have a thing like that people could latch onto. And so it felt like, oh, this is just a bunch of weird people role-playing animals, and there's this sexual component to it that feels kind of like gross from the outside. And, like, one of the things furries bring up is, you look at the people who walk around in their Superman costumes and their Star Trek outfits, and you think they're not having sex in those costumes? Wake up.
Based on stories I've heard about Dragon Con.
But I do think that changed in the late 20-teens. That was where I saw sort of an inflection point. And part of it was because we started to have a right-wing problem in our community. And as open and welcoming as we are, we said, those guys are not open and welcoming. Those guys actually want to denigrate other parts of our own community. And so, the one thing we can't tolerate is intolerance, that kind of thing. And we successfully, more or less successfully, excluded them from the community. Like, you can still hang out, you can come to cons, but don't wave your Confederate flag around cons. We're not going to give you a platform on stage to talk about stuff. And that got a lot of mainstream attention because there were not a lot of groups that were having luck getting the right-wing elements out of their communities at that time. And then people started to see us in a little bit of a different light.
Yeah, and I think going back to the kind of hierarchy, it's like there is an infamous CSI episode. Where I have not seen the episode myself, but it takes place at a furry convention. There was a murder there, and it was like, A, the costuming was awful, and B, it just completely focused on, oh, this is a sex thing. And so kind of in that public consciousness, you have this major mainstream show going, oh, these furries are this weird sex thing. And it's like, really?
Sorry, I have to interject that the murder in the CSI thing was a furry in a raccoon costume wandering around at night, possibly drunk, who was shot because the guy thought he was a coyote.
Yeah.
Some of my friends had T-shirts afterwards just saying, I thought it was a coyote.
So you have that. You have, like I said, kind of that, general, unfortunately, with every community, you're going to have your kind of cringy members. You're going to have your members who are make socially awkward look suave type of folks. And, for better and for worse. But unfortunately, some of that got highlighted a lot. And it's like, oh, this is what furry is like. It's just a bunch of weirdos playing dress up and doing who knows what and that sort of thing. And, I think one of the turning points, too, was the attack in it's Midwest Fur Fest in 2014. It's the Chicago Con that is still took over and is still the number one most popular furry convention. But one of the things that happened, and this was the first con that I attended, was 2014.
Oh, wow.
Midwest Fur Fest. I was just there for the day to meet a couple friends. I left, and a couple hours later, someone basically set off a chlorine attack in the stairwell of the hotel, and several dozen people had to be hospitalized. I saw a thing. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but someone was saying that his largest chemical like terrorist attack on US soil. I don't know if they've ever found the guy who did it, but basically, thankfully no one died. But it was a sort of thing where, like, that hit the news, and it's like, someone set off chlorine gas, which, not exactly friendly for breathing, even in tiny amounts. And, all of a sudden it's kind of like, okay, furries may be weird, but they don't deserve that. And so I think that might have helped with sort of the turning point of people kind of taking another look and being like, all right, what is this really about?
There's a kind of infamous clip of some newscasters sort of telling the story and then laughing about it
Oh,
because it's a furry convention.
Well, it was. I remember that clip. It was someone who was like, "What is a furry?" and don't know what the co-anchor whispered to her, but she just was like laughs and has to leave the studio because she's laughing, and it's like, really, after a chemical attack?
yeah. That's disturbing. I now remember exactly what you all are talking about, and finding that really distasteful. Just the way that people would talk about it. These are just people, but we're like making fun of potential death, which to me, I mean, even if you're not like a fan of a specific community, like I don't sit around thinking, oh, well, gosh, I hope they die. Like that's just a really horrible way of talking about it. And it, and all of what you guys are talking about, it does make me very keenly aware that, for all the positive development, so much of what the furry community has had to sort of deal with has been an issue of dramatic misunderstanding and sensationalizing of things that do exist in the community, but dragged out to their extreme in some similar ways to how other geek communities have. Although I think this, in some ways, maybe not to the furry communities that have dealt with an even worse version of it, because I think one of you, I can't remember, kind of got to this idea that there's an element of like taboo that has been sort of like heightened up, of like this is outside of the norm, this particular extreme element of the community, and so this is the thing we'll focus on as the representation of the whole, when, as we've been talking about earlier, right, the majority of the community is like a kid showing up at their first furry convention, finding their people, or just people, I don't know, hanging out at the bar, or like whatever, doing what normal people do at a convention. They just also happen to be, they have a persona and they have a suit and those kinds of different things. And they may, as we're going to turn to in a little bit, write fiction that fits in this as well. Yeah. So that it made me, I was trying to do some research, and one of the things that kind of came up for me was like the wiki article kept coming up, and it has like a bunch of studies listed. I'm putting quotations because I have questions about the studies, but this is exactly what the studies were sort of focused on. And the weird thing in the studies was the language that they used was, to me, just didn't make sense. Like, you're attaching these very specific interests to a group, but those interests, those words don't actually fit the group, because what the group may be interested in those extreme points is not the same thing. I'm not going to say the words because it's just whatever. But it seemed to me like that whole wiki article was like a huge chunk of it is just this stuff, misrepresentation, misunderstanding, and othering of a community that doesn't really deserve to be. I mean, no community really deserves to be othered.
One of the really neat things, and this fits a theme that runs through the whole community, as Robert said, a lot of us are creatives, and so there's a sense of when there's something that we want to see that doesn't exist, we make it.
Yes.
And there are researchers who are furries within the community who are doing studies on the furry community through a lens of someone who is part of it and understands it, and trying to not just look at demographics, but look at the sort of historical trends and likes and dislikes and other, really interesting behavioral studies across the fandom. And I'm not going to quote any of them because I don't have them at hand, but we're doing that ourselves also.
Good.
It's one of the senior researchers who helped create the COVID vaccine is a furry.
Really?
I want to say it's Chise, Chise, is her handle on social media. and I haven't heard it said. I've only read it, so I apologize if I've mispronounced it. But she posts a lot of like science news, and this is what's coming up with they're coming up with a vaccine against this kind of cancer type of thing, and posting a lot of information about it. And it's just like it just goes again. Furries are everywhere, and of course there is the joke. A lot of furries are in IT, and there is a joke that like if you had a plane reservation with a plane that was reserved by furries in the IT industry, if that crashed, half the internet would be down within a week. Because it's like they're the sort of people who are like behind the scenes working on that one little pillar keeping half of everything up. And
I have a non-furry friend who's a software engineer, and we were talking, and he said, I mentioned Anthrocon, and he said, "Oh, I know when Anthrocon is. That's when 2/3 of my team is off."
Yep.
Yeah. So another way of what are furries to that question is just normal people.
Yes.
Yep.
So I want to switch to another happy thing, which is part of what we wanted to talk about was furry literature, of which there is quite a bit. And there are a couple of awards that are focused on anthropomorphic, I would say literature and creative content, because there's other categories other than just literature. And obviously there's a Writers Guild as well. And so I do want to make sure we talk about that as well. And so I kind of wanted to get my impression, and as somebody who is a little bit outside, my impression is that the literature community, the writing community, has seemed to have grown quite a bit and is a little bit more visible than certainly I remember, decades ago when I kind of first learned about the community. And I kind of wanted to get, as writers yourselves, sort of your impressions of where the writing has come to now. How does that writing community, how does the readership kind of feel today for the literature? And if we could maybe, Kyell, we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. I remember the early days when most furry literature was in fanzines and just distributed to the community. I remember hearing that a furry had written a novel, which was Paul Kidd. I think Whisper of Wings was the first novel, although there might have been one before that, but that's the first one I remember. So first furry novel happening, that would have been in the 90s.
Oh.
And at the time, there was a lot of furry writing, but a lot of it was on websites or in fanzines. There is a huge archive of mostly short stories that people posted, and a lot of those archives have vanished, but there's still, I think probably tens of thousands, if not more, of just stories that have accumulated over 4 decades of the fandom being around and online. The changes that have happened partly happened in, I want to say, into the early 2000s. A friend and I started Sofa Wolf Press because we wanted to have a more, at least a semi-professional venue for furry fiction, and print on demand was becoming more affordable in those days. So we put together a nicer magazine format than a fanzine, which was kind of mimeographed at a copy store. We would do a print run. We'd get art. We'd staple bind it instead of having it coil bound or whatever the perfect bound was, and we would sell it. And then in the 2000s, other furry presses started springing up and started publishing via print on demand more novels, more anthologies, more collections of work. And we always tried to foster, I say we, but I mean the writing community always tried to foster that creativity and help each other. And that's another common theme through the furry fandom, even with fursuit makers is one of the biggest creative communities. Artists, visual artists will have just tons of forums saying, hey, if you're starting out, here's some tips. People will respond to people trying to get into the field. And so writing was the same way. We always wanted to encourage people and because we want there to be more furry writing out there. And as print on demand got better and as self-publishing went from a new thing to a thing a lot of people were doing to a thing maybe too many people were doing and now to somewhat respectable for certain, for certain authors and communities, and people are starting to see where you can divide that or judge that, I guess, based on other things. We started seeing more and more people saying, "Oh, this is cool. There's furry novels. I could write a furry novel. I could write some short stories." I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Fred Patton, who was a very active member of both the anime and the science fiction communities in Southern California, and was just tirelessly energetic in getting furry fiction produced and published and exposed to other communities. He believed so much in the furry community and his energy is responsible for a good deal of the growth that happened in the 2000s. And what I'm seeing now is a much larger Furry Writers Guild. I'm seeing lots of content, and I'll let Robert speak to that and how that's grown. But just seeing the number of people interested in the writing, the number of work they're producing. I've read some just wonderful books in the last 10 years that came out of our community that I would have been happy to pick up off a shelf in a bookstore and pay $10 or $15 or $20 for. And it's still a young community in a lot of ways. We've only been around, we've depending on who you ask, we've been around maybe 50 years at this point. The writing community is even younger. And we get a lot of, and demographically, the furry community, I think median or average age is like in the early 20s now. It keeps going down because we keep getting more like college students coming into the fandom. And so there's a lot of just energy and exciting ideas and people just exploring so many neat things. It's been really fantastic to see the growth.
Oh, absolutely. And Kyell, you've definitely written some stories that are, well, a lot of stories. I haven't read all of your stories yet. I've only read a few. So I apologize. My backlog is measured in bookshelves. Fred Patton, I cannot tell you how many anthologies and books on my bookshelf, and I kind of have a furry section, which has grown to several shelves now. Because every time I go to a convention, I keep buying books. I don't know how that happens. They just fall into my hand, and it happens. And we're not going to talk about that any further. I cannot tell you how many of those are like edited by Fred Patton on that. And it's just like, unfortunately he passed away. I don't remember. It was a few years ago.
2018.
2019?
2018. Yeah.
2018.
18, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but his impact is still felt for a lot of people that he's inspired, a lot of writers kind of getting that jump start in their careers. It's fantastic.
Would you like to also talk a little bit about the Writers Guild, which Kyell also raised?
Absolutely.
And I think that'd be great to talk about that development as well.
Yeah, so we have the Furry Writers Guild, which is, it's not quite like the Science Fiction Writers of America or one of the other large groups. We have several hundred members. It was started in 2011. It's a community and group dedicated to promoting and enriching anthropomorphic and furry literature, and in pretty much all of its forms. By and large, of course, the standard is you have short stories, you have anthologies, you have novels and novellas, but there's also podcasts like spoken word. There are we're working on integrating graphic novels and visual novel games into that kind of fold, because there's a lot of writing that goes into those as well, even though they may be more visually focused than a book. It's still writing. So we've undergone a fair bit of growth. I do not have numbers on hand on how many more members we've added in the past 5 years or whatever, but I can tell you, pre-pandemic, there was a time where our Telegram group was we would hit 99 members and just would never go above that. Someone would drop out and then someone join in, someone would drop out, someone would join in. Currently it sits at 289 members. And so, like I said earlier, we don't charge dues for membership. It's something that's been, talked about, and then it's okay, but what are we, we don't really have that kind of base to be we can charge dues for, and you can say you're a member. But we do have a process where you have to have published a book in a paying market, or several short stories in a paying market, or to qualify as a member. So there is still kind of a bar for entry. And anyone is welcome to come and join the community. We're very welcoming to anyone who wants to talk about the craft of writing, about furry literature, about, even book recommendations. For some reason, we have a lot of those. But we want to be that resource of, this is how writers can, talk with other writers, network, learn ropes of okay, I have this book that I want to write, how do I structure it? And then what do I look at for publishing? That sort of thing. We maintain a markets page where we have all of the open calls for furry anthologies and for anthologies in kind of the wider science fiction and fantasy market that accept furry stories. Because there's plenty of, it mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast, there's people who write werewolves. I mean, werewolves are a large part of furry. Or you have, fantasy writers who want to go, okay, I don't just want this dragon to fly and breathe fire and then get shot down, by the hero. What is this dragon doing? What does dragon society look like? There's plenty of room for that as well. So the Furry Writers Guild like I said, basically exists for promoting the furry literature and I don't want to sound like, it needs elevation, but elevating furry literature.
I get
Can
what you
always
mean.
use a little more elevation.
Always.
Getting it more attention, getting it kind of more respect, from the wider reading community. Yeah.
And trying to break into those spaces more.
So we're getting short on time, which makes me sad because I realized I have like 1,000 questions I can't ask now. Which, so given that we're talking about literature, I figured it'd be a really good opportunity to ask for a book recommendation from each of you. Thinking in terms of somebody who maybe has never read, or at least not knowingly has read a work of furry literature, what would you recommend they start with? And you might each have the same one or different ones. And maybe we'll if we can, we'll start with Robert this time, and then we'll go the opposite direction.
That's a very good question because I always have a hard time picking one favorite out of anything. And it also depends, what are you looking for? Like, what kind of fiction are you looking to enjoy? Do you want kind of a fantasy world that is, built from the ground up with different species of, fantastic creatures? Or do you want something, kind of more contemporary? Do you want something, we have mystery, we have every genre. So it's kind of hard to narrow down where should someone start without digging into, okay, what kind of reading are you looking for? What kind of fun are you looking to have?
Okay, I'll narrow it down.
So I apologize for a non-answer of sorts.
No. You're completely right, because this literature, there isn't a singular plot type. Right, it is the visual content, and then what you do with it. You could write a standard, like you could write a lifetime romance if you wanted to, just with anthropomorphic characters. So let's go with what might fit the community for the Skiffing Fantasy show. Let's go with something like a fantasy world or a fantasy work. What would you suggest there? Or what do you like? Might be the better question.
I mean, a lot of what I've read recently is anthologies. And there are a number of good anthologies out there. I'm very bad at settling. Like I said, I apologize. I am very bad at settling on one recommendation. Kyell, if you have kind of a recommendation,
I'm struggling with this because I didn't want to recommend one of my books specifically, and
I give you permission to do
it. but when you said anthology, then I thought anthology is great because it showcases a whole bunch of different authors, and because we had been talking about Fred Patton, one of my favorite anthologies that he edited, which I do happen to have a story in, but I also liked nearly all the stories that I read in that anthology, was titled Gods with Fur.
I have not. It's on my list to read, but I have heard many good things about it, so I would recommend that.
That was one Fred put together. It is, I believe, mostly, there's definitely some secondary world fantasy in there. There might be some science fiction-y ones too, and there's a whole range of different styles and authors. And my story in there is actually an illustration of the difficulty of categorizing furry fiction. The story that I like to tell is I write a lot in a contemporary world, but populated with furries. And so the question is that fantasy? Because it's a contemporary world, but the inhabitants are not human. And one of my books was nominated or put for, I don't think it actually made the list. I don't remember how it was done, but the Spectrum Awards are for queer science fiction and fantasy. And they talked to me one year when we had sent them one of my books that was in a contemporary world, and they said, we had this long email chain going back and forth for a week debating whether this was fantasy enough to be eligible for the Spectrum Awards, and they eventually came down on the side of it was not. But I can see both sides of it. So my story in that anthology is a short one, but it's a contemporary world, and most of the others are fantasy, and I liked that anthology quite a bit.
It's kind of like almost an alternate history sort of thing, where instead of humans, settling the entire world, you have anthropomorphic animals or beings. I do have one recommendation, also edited by Fred Patton. It is the Ursa Major anthology.
Oh.
And the Ursa Major is one of the awards that I believe you mentioned earlier. It's one of the furry community awards that goes on every year. And this was an anthology of, I believe I would have to look it up to be completely clear, but I believe it was like a number of the winners or so
I think it was the short fiction winners over a period of years.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I was pretty sure it was that, but I hate saying things and then it turns out I'm wrong.
So you might have included excerpts from some novels as well.
Yes.
I don't remember, but I think it came out in the 2010s, and the awards had been going on for 10 or 15 years by that point.
Yes. So it's the Ursa Major Awards Anthology. And I would highly recommend that as an entry point as well, because you're going to be getting, what a lot of people have chosen as some of the best short stories over a period of time. And like you said, Kyell, I do recall, I think some of them are excerpts from novels. So you will have then, you're like, oh, I really enjoyed this story. I want to read more of it. There's a novel.
Fantastic.
So
that would be where I might even. This is where I would go if I weren't talking to you right now, which would be like go to the 2 awards, because there's the Ursa Major and then the
Kyodal Awards.
Yeah,
yeah, which is from the guilds, and that would be like where I would start to be like, okay, what's the stuff that the community thinks is good? Try to figure it out. And I love that you mentioned, Kyell, that. The question of whether or not it's actually fantasy gets complicated. Because I play there's a comic I think based on it, but or a comic that it's based on, but there's a video game called Black Sad where you play a cat detective. Okay, so you know, so you play. For those that don't know, you're an anthropomorphic cat who's like a your classic like Dick Tracy type detective,
noir detective,
noir detective in a world with all forms of anthropomorphic peoples, including rhinoceroses and other kinds of very fun things. And every time I play it, I'm just sitting here going, I know they're animal people, but like my brain is not quite, because I'm just a detective. Because everything about it is very human-like, but I'm not a human. I'm a very handsome cat detective.
The comics are pretty great.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, they're Dark Horse, I think, has the English translations.
Oh, I didn't know they weren't in English.
I finally got my hands on the comic, so It's one of those that I've been looking for a while, and I finally got it, and I'm like, yes.
I need to read it. It sounds fantastic. The game's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're pretty excellent. I have not played the game, so it's good to hear that one's fun also.
Yeah, it's pretty good, and if you're not really good at games, it's a game that you can enjoy as well, because it's not like an Elder Scroll or like one of those games where you got to like get good. You can just kind of enjoy the story.
Twitch game.
Yeah, it's not one of those. It's more the mystery and kind of enjoying the story, and yeah. So part of why I like it, because I'm too old to be good at games.
I feel that.
Yeah. Okay, so we got to wrap up, but I have my 2 stock questions I got to ask, since you both are creative-oriented folks, and so I have to ask the question: what is it that you happen to be working on next that you are allowed to tell us about? And if we'll go the opposite direction this time, we'll start with you, Kyell.
That's a longer answer than maybe you were expecting, because I'm always working on multiple projects at once. I will try to run through them pretty quickly. I am working on the next book in a series that takes place in our contemporary world, but with shapeshifter populations. Called the Wolftown series. The first 2 books are out already. I'm working on the 3rd one in that series. I am working on a continuation of my supernatural new adult trilogy that came out in the 20-teens. I had another idea, so there's another book, another sort of supernatural adventure book coming out. And I'm just wrapping up a mystery in my homage to Agatha Christie style mystery series. And as a bonus, in my spare time, I'm working on a book that goes through the process of how I write a novel. That
Nice.
That I'm very excited about.
You're busy.
I have to keep moving.
Yeah.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. Robert, please.
So, I have only had one published story so far. Still working on kind of getting I guess, novel together. It was something that I had posted for like 13 years ago, and it's like I'm starting to feel that abyss of time thing. And people are like, "Oh, are you going to continue this?" I'm like, "It's so old." I'm rewriting it from the ground up, though. It is a fantasy kind of romance that is between a human and a griffin. No relation to my, Sona character. Just happens to be a griffin. And they're kind of, the griffin, of course, can speak and think, is, everything like that. So, they are teamed up together as kind of an experiment to try and get this fantasy. It's a fantasy world where there are humans, griffins, and don't call them lizard folk, but they're lizard folk. And one of the things that the main human nation is trying to do is make up for some sins of the past, and working more with griffins and with these, people of the low plains is what you should call them. But the human and griffin are what are called flight partners. So it's the sort of thing where it's not quite a military organization. It's sort of like Starfleet in a sense, but in fantasy. And they are, basically share a rank is how it works. But then they're kind of assigned to a distant outpost. They don't have much to do, so they kind of spend a lot of time with each other, start to realize that they've fallen in love with each other.
Oh.
And it kind of goes from there with the complications of, okay, how do we make a romance work when we're not the same species? We have different cultures. There are all these hurdles to overcome. And so that's currently the main thing that I'm working on. And then I have a Trello sheet that is full of literally 24 different works in progress and ideas. And that is with me sitting there convincing myself that the new ideas that keep popping up are, that I don't want to write that. Because the ideas just keep coming.
Yeah.
I
have that folder too. It just anytime I have something, I just stick it in there. I was like, I can't work on you right now.
But so by and large, a lot of what I write, I've been posting online. I have a Patreon and Subscribestar that I've been posting to. A lot of what I've been writing is either fantasy or science fiction. A lot of it is romance. Most of it is erotica at this point. Just because I like exploring kind of how a lot of his romance and a lot of his erotica, Venn diagram, nearly a circle. How do two different people bridge those differences and come together? And how do they negotiate not just the challenges inherent in any relationship, but one where the two of you might, have a different idea of what a standard relationship looks like? And I just like exploring those angles.
Fair. Okay, real quick, because then we gotta close out. Kyell, would you let folks know where they can find you in case they would like to find your work and so on?
You can find ebooks and audiobooks of mine by searching on any major platform where you find books. The places that I like people to buy them are from furplanet.com, which is exactly how it sounds. And that's for physical books. And then baddogbooks.com is where ebooks are. Those are furry-owned book sites. And so more money goes to our community instead of going to Jeff Bezos or Tim Cook or, whoever it is who owns Google right now. But if you need to go to Amazon or Google or Apple, I'm on all those places as well. Just look up Kyell, first name, and then Gold is the last name, and you'll find a whole bunch of my books. I also have a monthly, it's a 3 times a month newsletter at Substack, which is just kyellgold.substack.com. And that is where I put out books, the things that I'm working on, things that are coming out, things that I think are interesting. I will do occasionally excerpts of stuff I'm working on and writing tips 1 time a month. And I want to add one thing because my husband was pinging me in a chat that I did not have open until just 2 minutes ago. The social account for the furry who works at Moderna, who was working on the vaccine, is on Blue Sky. They are Sailor, like the profession, SAILOR, Roo, ROO, Scout.
Oh.
So if people want to follow them, I recommend it. Sailor, Roo, Scout.bsky.social.
Oh, fantastic.
Just wanted to get that in there before the end of the stream.
And then, Robert, where can folks find you?
So, like I said, I have a Patreon and a Subscribestar. Patreon, you can find me at, it's Resolute, dictionary spelling, and then RL. I also have a link tree where it has basically all of my links where you can find me. That is either linktree.com or linktr.ee/ResoluteRL. And you will find links to, like I said, my 2 subscriber sites, or I have sites stories posted publicly on several different platforms there.
Perfect. And then obviously the Furry Writers Guild is furrywritersguild.com for folks that want to find that.
furrywritersguild.com, yes. And you can find us there as well and check out our market listings. Check out, I believe we have a book recommendations. We have socials. Feel free to check it out.
There's a bunch of stuff there. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you both very much for giving your time and fielding a whole bunch of questions and educating people about this community.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, folks, that's the end of the show. So if you'd like to let us know what you thought, or you want to send us a question or something, skiffyandfanty@gmail.com is the place to go. Or you can go on our Discord if you're part of the Patreon, and you can go there. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a whole bunch of places. You can find links to all that at skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings. And then there's links. That's like our link tree, because we did one of those. And then a reminder, every Friday, 7 p.m. Central, twitch.tv/alphabet streams is where the live version of the show is recorded. And then you'll find the podcast version on our feeds, and then YouTube, and we're wherever you can find podcasts. And then our patrons, patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. There is a very long list of Patreon supporters. It's not that long, but it is long. But I'm going to say their names super quick, and then I will end the show without saying anything about me, because my mouth is moving enough as it is. And so thanks to all our Patreon supporters: Andrea the Alluring, Cameron the Chthonic, is such a hard word, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Cultured, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Jen the Jabberwocky, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, Karen the Kickass, Kat the Kinematic, Matthew the Magnificent, I'm almost there, Paul the Pious, Phoebe the Eloquent, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A the Sensational, Sarah E the Sublime, Sarah O the Rapturous, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Tari the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant. Whew. Okay. Thanks, everybody, very much for being here. I think this was a happy episode, so we can take that as the way that we end this, as being happy, because I feel happy. So with that in mind, happy ending and scene.